Don't you dare tell anyone what you saw. My mother's fingers dug into my shoulders as she pushed me into my bedroom. Her face was pale, her voice shaking with something between fear and fury. Do you understand me, Lucy? Not a word to anyone. I was 16 years old, standing in my room still trembling from what I'd just witnessed in Uncle Richard's study. My cousin Emma, only 14, running out with tears streaming down her face. Her shirt buttoned wrong. Uncle Richard following behind, adjusting his belt, telling my parents it was just a misunderstanding. But Emma, I started. Emma is fine. Mom cut me off. Uncle Richard explained everything. She got upset over nothing. You know how dramatic teenage girls can be. I wasn't dramatic. I knew exactly what I'd seen. And I knew it wasn't the first time because 6 months earlier, it had happened to me. My name is Lucy Martinez, and this is the story of how my family's most powerful member destroyed lives while everyone looked the other way. Uncle Richard wasn't really my uncle. He was my father's older brother, but everyone in the family called him Uncle Richard with a mixture of respect and fear. He owned 3 car dealerships, a construction company, and half the commercial real estate in our town. Every family gathering happened at his mansion. Every family crisis was solved with his money. When I was 15, my father lost his job. Uncle Richard hired him to manage one of the dealerships. When my grandmother needed expensive medical care, Uncle Richard paid the bills. When my cousin's family almost lost their house, Uncle Richard bought it and let them stay for minimal rent. The entire family owed him everything. And Uncle Richard made sure everyone knew it. Your Uncle Richard is the reason this family survives, Dad would say whenever Richard's name came up. We need to show him respect and gratitude. What Dad didn't know, what nobody wanted to know, was what Uncle Richard expected in return. It happened to me 6 months before Emma, at Uncle Richard's annual 4th of July party. The house was full of relatives, music blasting from speakers by the pool, adults drinking and laughing while kids ran around with sparklers. Uncle Richard found me in the hallway outside the bathroom. Lucy, can you help me with something in my study? I need someone young to explain this new phone my wife bought me. It seemed innocent. Uncle Richard was always asking the younger cousins for tech help. I followed him to his study, a wood-paneled room that smelled like leather and cigars. He locked the door behind us. Uncle Richard, the phone. I started. There's no phone, Lucy. His voice changed, became softer, almost gentle. I just wanted to talk to you alone. You've grown into such a beautiful young woman. What happened next took less than 10 minutes but changed everything about who I was. When it was over, Uncle Richard straightened his clothes and smiled at me like nothing had happened. This is our special secret, Lucy. You understand that, right? If you tell anyone, it would devastate your father. He'd lose his job. Your family would lose everything. I stood there, frozen, my whole body shaking. Besides, he continued, pulling out his wallet, who would believe you? I'm Uncle Richard. I'm the one who keeps this family together. Your parents trust me completely. He handed me $200 bills. Buy yourself something nice. And remember, this stays between us, or your father suffers the consequences. I took the money with numb fingers. I went back to the party, washed my face in the bathroom, and pretended nothing had happened. When my mother asked why I looked upset, I said I had a headache. Nobody questioned it. Nobody suspected. Uncle Richard rejoined the party, like the generous host he always was, and I sat by the pool trying not to cry. I tried to tell my mother 2 days later. We were folding laundry in my room, and I opened my mouth to say the words, but she spoke first. Your father is so relieved about his job at the dealership, she said, smiling. Uncle Richard called this morning and said your dad is doing excellent work. He even mentioned a possible promotion. I closed my mouth. The words died in my throat. We're so lucky to have Uncle Richard in our lives, Mom continued. I don't know what we'd do without him. I said nothing. I hid the $200 in the back of my drawer and tried to forget it ever happened. But every family gathering after that became torture. Uncle Richard would smile at me across the dinner table. He'd pat my shoulder when saying goodbye. He'd ask how school was going, his voice friendly and warm, while his eyes reminded me of our secret. I started making excuses not to attend family events. I claimed I had too much homework, or wasn't feeling well, or had plans with friends. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes my parents insisted I go anyway. 6 months later, I saw Uncle Richard leading Emma down the same hallway toward his study. Emma was my cousin on my mother's side, sweet and quiet and trusting. She looked up to Uncle Richard because he'd paid for her braces when her parents couldn't afford them. I knew exactly what was about to happen. I followed them. When I heard Emma crying through the door, I burst in without knocking. Uncle Richard was standing too close to her, his hand on her arm. Emma's face was streaked with tears. "Emma, come on," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Your mom's looking for you." Uncle Richard's expression darkened. "We're having a private conversation, Lucy. Close the door."
No.
I grabbed Emma's hand. "Come with me."
Now.
Emma ran out and I followed. Uncle Richard called after us, his voice sharp with warning. But I didn't stop. I found my mother and told her what I'd seen. That's when she dragged me to my room and told me to stay silent. Uncle Richard explained everything, Mom said, her voice firm. Emma misunderstood an innocent gesture. She's young and confused about appropriate boundaries. He was just trying to talk to her about her behavior at school. "That's not what happened," I insisted. He was, "Enough." Mom's voice cracked like a whip. "I won't have you spreading vicious rumors about a man who's done nothing but help this family. Do you understand what would happen if you started telling lies about Uncle Richard?" "They're not lies. Your father would lose his job. We'd lose our house. Your grandmother would lose her medical care. Is that what you want? To destroy this family over teenage dramatics?" I stared at my mother, seeing her clearly for the first time. She wasn't protecting me or Emma. She was protecting her comfortable life, the stability Uncle Richard's money provided. "What about Emma?" I whispered. "What about protecting her? Emma is fine, and you'll stay away from her. I don't want you putting ideas in her head." I tried talking to Emma at school the next day, but she wouldn't look at me. When I finally cornered her by her locker, she kept her eyes on the floor. "Emma, what happened in Uncle Richard's study?" "Nothing happened." She cut me off, her voice flat. I was upset about something else. Uncle Richard was just trying to help. My mom explained it to me. "Emma, please. I know what he did because he did it to me too." Her eyes finally met mine, wide with shock. For a moment, I thought she might tell the truth, might admit what Uncle Richard had done. But then fear replaced the shock. "You're lying," she whispered. "Uncle Richard would never. He's family. He takes care of us." She slammed her locker shut and walked away. I stood there alone in the hallway, realizing that Emma's mother had done the same thing mine had, chosen financial security over protecting her daughter. I spent the next 2 years in a fog. I went to school, did my homework, applied to colleges. I avoided family gatherings whenever possible. When I couldn't avoid them, I stayed as far from Uncle Richard as possible. He never tried anything again with me. He'd move on to easier targets, girls whose parents hadn't yet caught him, girls who didn't know what to watch for. Sometimes I'd see him talking to younger cousins, his hand on their shoulders, his voice warm and friendly, and my stomach would twist with sick dread. But I didn't say anything. I'd learned my lesson. Speaking up meant being called a liar. It meant threatening my family's financial security. It meant being isolated and dismissed. So I stayed silent, and I hated myself for it. Then, during my senior year of high school, everything changed. Emma tried to kill herself. The call came on a Tuesday night. Emma had taken a bottle of her mother's sleeping pills and was rushed to the hospital. She survived, but barely. The whole family gathered at the hospital waiting room, including Uncle Richard, playing the concerned family patriarch perfectly. "I can't understand it," Emma's mother kept saying through tears. She seemed fine, happy. What would make her do something like this? I knew. I knew exactly what had driven Emma to that point, but I was too much of a coward to say it out loud. Until I overheard Uncle Richard talking to my father in the hallway. "Teenage girls are so unstable these days," Richard was saying. "All that social media pressure. Parents need to monitor their daughters more carefully. Something inside me snapped. I walked up to them, my hands balled into fists. It wasn't social media. It was you. Uncle Richard's expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. Lucy, this isn't the time for... You did this to her. Just like you did it to me. The hallway went silent. My father stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Lucy, what are you talking about? Ask Uncle Richard what he did to Emma in his study 6 months ago. Ask him what he did to me at the 4th of July party 2 years ago. You're hysterical, Uncle Richard said calmly. The stress of Emma's situation is making you say things you don't mean. I mean every word. My voice was shaking, but I kept going. You hurt me, and when I tried to tell Mom, she made me stay silent because you pay Dad's salary. Then you did the same thing to Emma, and her mom made her stay silent too. And now Emma tried to kill herself because she couldn't live with what you did. My father looked between us, confusion turning to horror. Richard, what is she talking about? Your daughter is having some kind of breakdown, Richard said smoothly. I think you should take her home before she embarrasses the family further. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm telling the truth. And I'm done staying silent. My mother appeared from around the corner, her face white. She'd heard everything. So had Emma's mother, who stood frozen in the waiting room doorway. Lucy, we'll discuss this at home, Mom said, her voice tight with warning.
No.
We'll discuss it right here, right now. Because Emma almost died, and it's Uncle Richard's fault. If I'd spoken up 2 years ago, maybe she'd be okay. But you told me to stay silent, so I did. And look what happened. Emma's mother finally found her voice. What are you saying about my daughter? Before I could answer, a nurse interrupted. Emma's asking for Lucy. She says she won't talk to anyone else. The adults exchanged glances. Uncle Richard's jaw tightened. But Emma's mother nodded at me.
Go.
Please. I walked past Uncle Richard, and as I did, he grabbed my arm. You're making a mistake, he whispered. Think about what this will cost your family. I pulled away. You're the mistake. And I don't care what it costs anymore. Emma looked so small in the hospital bed, pale against white sheets, tubes running from her arms. When she saw me, tears started streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. You tried to tell me, and I didn't listen. I thought if I just stayed quiet like my mom said, it would be okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. I sat beside her bed and took her hand. I know. I'm sorry, I didn't fight harder to protect you. He kept doing it, she said, her voice breaking. After that first time, he'd find ways to get me alone. At family dinners, at holidays. He said if I told anyone my dad would lose his job and it would be my fault. I tried to make myself disappear, tried to be invisible, but it didn't work. It's not your fault, Emma. None of this is your fault. I just wanted it to stop. I didn't know how else to make it stop. Through the hospital room door, I could see our mothers arguing in hushed voices. My father stood apart from them, his face buried in his hands. We need to tell them everything, I said to Emma. Both of us, together. The truth. They won't believe us. They'll say we're lying. Uncle Richard will. Uncle Richard doesn't get to control us anymore. Let him threaten. Let him try to destroy our families financially. The truth matters more. Emma squeezed my hand. I'm scared.
Me too.
But staying silent almost killed you. I'm not letting that happen again. We called in Emma's mother first, then mine, then my father. One by one, we told them everything. Every detail, every threat, every time Uncle Richard had hurt us while the family looked the other way. Emma's mother cried. My mother went pale and silent. My father's face cycled through disbelief, horror, and finally rage. Why didn't you tell me? Dad asked, his voice cracking. Lucy, why didn't you come to me? Because Mom told me not to. Because she said you'd lose your job. Because Uncle Richard made it clear that speaking up would destroy our family. My mother finally spoke, her voice hollow. I didn't believe it was that serious. I thought you were exaggerating. You didn't want to believe it, I corrected. Because believing it meant doing something about it. Emma's father arrived at the hospital, furious at being kept in the dark. When he learned what Uncle Richard had done to his daughter, he called the police immediately. My father joined him, despite my mother's protests. "This will destroy the family," Mom kept saying. "Everything we've built, everything Richard has provided. He's a predator." Dad cut her off, his voice cold. "I don't care about the money or the job. He hurt my daughter. He hurt Emma. How many others, do you think? How many other girls in this family did we fail to protect?" The question hung in the air, ugly and unavoidable. How many others had stayed silent? How many had been threatened into compliance? How many had we enabled by choosing comfort over truth? The police arrived and took statements from Emma and me. They went to question Uncle Richard, who immediately lawyered up and denied everything. He called my father, angry and threatening, saying we'd all regret this betrayal. Dad hung up on him. The next few weeks were chaos. Uncle Richard's lawyers tried to discredit us, painting us as troubled teens seeking attention. Some family members believed us. Others sided with Richard, unable or unwilling to accept what he'd done. My father quit his job at the dealership. We struggled financially, but Dad found work elsewhere, taking a pay cut but keeping his dignity. Emma's father did the same, walking away from Uncle Richard's charity even though it meant hardship. Other girls started coming forward. A cousin from my father's side, now in college, admitted Richard had assaulted her when she was 15. A neighbor's daughter revealed he'd cornered her at a party. Each story followed the same pattern, Richard using his position and power, threatening consequences if anyone spoke up. The police investigation expanded. Richard's lawyers fought every step, but the evidence was mounting. Text messages he'd deleted weren't actually deleted. Security footage from his house showed him leading young girls to his study repeatedly. His pattern of predatory behavior became impossible to deny. Uncle Richard's wife, Aunt Patricia, called me 3 weeks after Emma's hospitalization. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice strained. "Can we meet?" We met at a coffee shop far from our neighborhood. Patricia looked like she'd aged 10 years, her face drawn with exhaustion and something else, shame. "I knew," she said quietly, staring at her untouched coffee. "Not the details, but I knew something was wrong. Girls would leave his study crying, or they'd avoid him at family gatherings. I told myself I was imagining things, that Richard was just awkward with teenagers. Why didn't you say something? Because I was afraid. Of being alone, of losing my lifestyle, of admitting I'd married a monster. I chose my comfort over those girls' safety. Over your safety." Tears streamed down her face. "I'm so sorry, Lucy. I failed you. I failed all of you." She told me she was filing for divorce and would testify against Richard if needed. She'd already moved her daughters, my cousins, out of the house to stay with her sister. The trial took 18 months to reach court. Uncle Richard's lawyers tried every delay tactic possible, but eventually, he faced a jury. Emma and I testified, along with 3 other girls he'd assaulted over the years. It was brutal. His lawyers attacked our credibility, questioned our motives, suggested we'd coordinated our stories for attention or money. They painted Uncle Richard as a generous man being destroyed by vindictive teenagers. But the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, witness statements, the pattern of behavior spanning years. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on multiple counts of sexual assault of minors. Uncle Richard was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He'd be 72 when released, his empire dismantled, his reputation destroyed. As they led him away, he looked at me one last time. Not with remorse or shame, but with cold hatred. Even in defeat, he couldn't accept responsibility for what he'd done. The conviction fractured our extended family. Some members blamed me and Emma for destroying Uncle Richard and breaking up the family. They claimed we'd overreacted, that we'd ruined a good man's life over misunderstandings. Others apologized for not believing us sooner. My grandmother, Richard's mother, died 6 months after the trial. Some family members said the stress of her son's conviction killed her. Maybe it did. But protecting him would have required more girls to suffer, and I couldn't carry that guilt. My parents' marriage almost didn't survive. Dad was furious at Mom for making me stay silent initially. Mom was devastated by guilt and couldn't forgive herself. They went to counseling, worked through their issues slowly and painfully. Emma and I both went to therapy. We had to process the trauma, the betrayal, the years of silence that had poisoned us from the inside out. It took time, but gradually we healed. 2 years after the trial, I started college with a new purpose. I majored in social work, determined to help other victims find their voices. Emma studied criminal justice, wanting to work in victim advocacy. We spoke at schools sometimes, sharing our story to help other young people understand that silence protects predators, not victims. We told them that speaking up is terrifying but necessary. That consequences might be real, financial hardship, family fractures, public scrutiny, but staying silent has consequences too. Some of Uncle Richard's former employees reached out to apologize. They'd suspected something but hadn't wanted to jeopardize their jobs by speaking up. I understood that impulse now. Fear is powerful, and abusers like Richard are experts at exploiting it. But understanding didn't mean forgiving everyone. Some family members who'd called me a liar, who defended Richard even after the evidence was undeniable, never apologized. I cut them out of my life without hesitation. Emma's recovery was harder than mine. The suicide attempt had left her with ongoing mental health struggles. But she was committed to healing, to building a life Uncle Richard hadn't destroyed. I used to think staying silent would protect my family, she told me during one of our coffee dates. But it almost killed me. And it would have kept him free to hurt others. Speaking up saved my life, even though it felt like it was destroying it at the time. We created a small foundation with money from Patricia's divorce settlement. She'd insisted on it, wanting something good to come from her years of willful ignorance. The foundation provided counseling services for abuse victims from low-income families. Some people said we were profiting from our victimhood. They didn't understand that healing isn't profitable. It's expensive, exhausting work that never truly ends. We were just trying to make the path easier for others walking it. My mother apologized to me hundreds of times over the years. Each apology felt hollow at first, but gradually I began to see her remorse was genuine. She volunteered with the foundation, worked with other mothers who'd failed to protect their children, helped them understand the importance of believing their kids. I was so afraid of losing our stability, she told me during one of our sessions. I couldn't see past the financial security Richard provided. I convinced myself you were exaggerating because the alternative was too terrifying to face. But you sacrificed me for that stability. And Emma. And who knows how many others. I know. And I'll carry that guilt forever. All I can do now is try to make sure other mothers don't make the same mistake. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Our relationship would never be what it was before. That innocent trust was gone forever. But we were building something new, more honest, if less comfortable. 5 years after Uncle Richard's conviction, I graduated with my master's degree in social work. Emma finished her criminal justice degree and got a job with the district attorney's office working specifically on sex crimes cases. We'd built careers from our trauma, transformed our pain into purpose. It didn't erase what happened, didn't make it worthwhile. Nothing could do that. But it gave meaning to our suffering. Emma and I spoke at a conference for abuse survivors, sharing our story of how family silence enabled a predator. Afterward, a woman in her 40s approached us, crying. Your uncle assaulted me 30 years ago, she said. I was 14 and he was family friend. I told my parents and they made me stay silent. They said reporting him would tear apart our 2 families. I've carried that silence my whole life.
4.
We listened as she told her story, validation she'd never received from her own family. There were dozens like her at that conference, people whose families had prioritized peace over protection, silence over safety. Uncle Richard filed appeals from prison, claiming misconduct and wrongful conviction. Each one was denied. He'd never admit guilt, never show genuine remorse. He'd spend the next 15 years in prison convinced he was the victim, not the predator. Patricia remarried, a kind man who treated her daughters with respect and appropriate boundaries. She stayed involved with our foundation, dedicating her life to undoing some of the harm she'd enabled through her silence. The extended family gradually reformed, split into those who'd chosen accountability and those still defending Richard. Holidays were smaller, less complicated, but more honest. We didn't pretend everything was fine anymore. My younger cousins, Richard's daughters, struggled with their father's crimes. They'd been too young to understand what he'd been doing, but old enough to feel the aftermath. We made sure they had therapy, support, and the understanding that their father's actions weren't their responsibility. Today, 10 years after I spoke up in that hospital hallway, I run a nonprofit supporting abuse survivors. Emma works as a prosecutor specializing in sex crimes. Together, we've helped dozens of families navigate the aftermath of abuse. My parents are still together, their relationship rebuilt on honesty instead of comfortable lies. They volunteer with the foundation, using their mistake to help other parents do better. Uncle Richard remains in prison. He'll be 72 when released, his power and influence destroyed by the same family loyalty he'd weaponized for so long. Sometimes I wonder if he ever acknowledges what he did, if he ever feels genuine remorse. Probably not. Men like him rarely do. But I've stopped caring about his redemption. My focus is on survivors, on breaking the cycles of silence that protect predators, on helping families understand that speaking up, even when it costs everything, is always the right choice. My parents asked me to stay silent. They chose financial security over my safety, comfort over justice. That silence nearly killed Emma and allowed Uncle Richard to hurt more girls. But I didn't stay silent forever. I found my voice, even though using it cost my family's stability and fractured our relationships. Speaking up was the hardest, scariest thing I've ever done. It was also the most important. Because silence protects predators, but truth, messy, painful, expensive truth, protects the innocent. And some truths are too important to keep quiet, no matter what they cost. I won't stay silent forever. I never could. And every survivor who finds their voice because of mine makes every consequence.